Okay, now let's consider how to properly look at transits to Vargas, transits to divisional charts. This has come up many, many times recently where people were writing to me asking about transits to a particular Varga, and they were making a really simple yet serious mistake when they were considering transits to a Varga, to a divisional chart. What most people do is they'll say something like, Saturn is in Pisces. And then what they end up doing is taking that Saturn in Pisces and then saying that then Saturn is impacting Pisces in all of the Vargas. And to help illustrate this, what we want to do is pull up some charts for, let's say, the Drekana. Let me get me out of the way here. The Drekana or the Navamsha, and let's do the Dasumsha as well. So we've got the Drekana chart, the Navamsha chart, and the Dasumsha chart. We'll do the same thing over here. Drekana, Navamsha, Dasumsha. Now in Kala, what I like to do to determine how transits are affecting Vargas is to just pull up two different charts. So let's pretend that this chart on the left here is the birth chart. This is the chart of the client that's coming and saying, hey, can you tell me what's going on by transit? So this is their birth chart. And these are the Vargas for their particular birth chart. And let's pretend I just created another chart. And let's pretend that these are the transits for right now. And what we're going to see is when we compare these two things, that when it comes to transits, that right now we're going to have K2 in the same sign with Saturn, their natal Saturn. We're going to have Venus in the same sign with their Jupiter, Mars, and Venus. And Saturn's going to be doing the same thing. We're going to see that by transit, Jupiter is going to be impacting the same sign as Libra where their Rahu is placed. These are just ways that we want to think about this. And that is transits of the what's going on in the sky to their natal chart. So this is the sky right now, and this is the natal chart. We also can use different ways. So we can get on Kala and we could just go to the transit screen. So we go to transits, transits animated. What this is going to show us is the inner wheel is the person's birth chart. The outer wheel are the transits that are going on right now. So this outer wheel would theoretically be a reflection of this chart over here. All right, but this is more effective when we're just looking at transits from what's going on in the Rashis, the signs right now, into the birth chart using the transits animated calendar. But when it comes to looking in the Vargas, what we want to do is pull up two separate charts. Now again, what do most people do? What most people are going to do is they're going to say, Saturn is in Pisces right now in the sky. Again, we're switching gears here a little bit. We're saying Saturn is in Pisces right now in the sky. And then what people are going to do is they're going to say, oh, well, if Saturn is in Pisces in the sky right now, then that means that Saturn is also in Pisces in the D3. Saturn is in Pisces in the D9. And Saturn is in Pisces in the D10, and Saturn is in Pisces in the D16. And so they're going to end up reading the transits to the Vargas in relationship to Saturn in the broader Rashi, in the broader sign. And that doesn't work, and the reason it doesn't work is because it kind of illustrates a lack of understanding of how the Vargas are really put together, because the Vargas are sections of a sign, right? Meaning that, for example, when we look at this birth chart, by having Saturn at 18 degrees of Pisces, then that's going to put Saturn in the Drekana of Cancer, because it's in the segment of Pisces that is the Drekana of Cancer. By having Saturn at 18 degrees of Pisces, that puts it in the Navamsha of Sagittarius, because Pisces is divided up into 9 separate sections. And based on Saturn being at 18 degrees of Pisces, by being in that section of the sign, that relates to Sagittarius in the Navamsha. With the Dasamsha, by Saturn being at 18 degrees 08 of Pisces, with the Dasamsha, we would divide this Pisces up into 10 individual segments. And by being at 18 degrees, it's then going to fall in the Dasamsha of Taurus. So what we see is that the Vargas themselves are just individualized slices of the sign, and the degree a planet is in is very, very important. So if I'm looking at this chart, and this is the birth chart of the person that's coming to me, and I want to know by transit, and this is the transit chart, remember. So birth chart over here on the left, transit chart on the right. We're going to see that natally their Saturn is in Pisces. But by transit, we're going to have Saturn in Sagittarius. So by transit, it's going to be on top of this person's ascendant, their Venus, their Mars, their Jupiter. So when it comes to the birth chart, yes, I'm going to say that they're going to have a Saturn transit to their first house in their birth chart. But by having Saturn at 15 degrees of Sagittarius, well, that's going to put it in a particular situation throughout the other Vargas, based on the degree and how that sign of Sagittarius is divided up. So by having Saturn at 15 degrees of Sagittarius, that's going to put Saturn by transit into the Drekana of Aries, right? That's by transit. That's what's really going on in the sky. Right now, if you want to know what is in the Drekana of Aries, see if there's anything at 15 degrees of Sagittarius. And here we see there's Saturn at the middle of Aries in the Drekana. And what that means then is that by transit, that Saturn in the sky, so first it's here in the birth, in the Rashi, in the sign, in the sky. And by being at that degree, that's going to put it into the Drekana of Aries. So that means right now in the sky, Saturn is in the Drekana of Aries. That means that if anyone has planets in Aries in their Drekana, that Saturn will be influencing those planets. So in this chart, we see that this Mars and this Jupiter, and even the ascendant of the Drekana, is having a Saturn transit to it. Same thing. If we want to know what kind of transits are going on in the person's Navamsha, well, by having Saturn at 15 degrees of Sagittarius in the sky by transit, remember this is the transit chart, then that's going to put Saturn in Leo in the Navamsha, which means that right now in the sky, Saturn is in the Navamsha of Leo, just by our example. So that means then that Saturn will be impacting this person's 12th house and their Mars in their Navamsha. So this person is having a Saturn transit to their Mars in the Navamsha. Same thing if we want to look at the D10, the Dasamsha for career and great fruits. Well, what kind of transit is Saturn giving to their Dasamsha, their chart for career and great fruits? Well, again, by having Saturn at 15 degrees in Sagittarius by transit up in the sky, we need to see where does Saturn go in the Dasamsha. And there he is in Taurus. So right now, theoretically, we're going to have Saturn in the Dasamsha of Taurus, transit-wise. So that's going to put Saturn in Taurus in their D10. So by this person's chart, we're going to see that they're kind of having a Saturn return related to their D10, because Saturn by transit's in the Dasamsha of Taurus, and Saturn is in this person's Dasamsha. So that Saturn by transit, even though in the birth chart we're not seeing any kind of relationship other than they're in angles from each other. Here's the birth chart Saturn, here's the transit of Saturn. They're in angles from each other, sure. But when we take the Saturn from transit into each of the Vargas and see how those Vargas by transit relate to the Vargas of the client, we're going to get some really profound information here. So you might miss this Saturn transit in the Dasumpsha, hitting this person's Saturn in their natal Dasumpsha. And what this really shows us is that when Saturn is in the Dasumpsha of Taurus by transit, he will be impacting everyone's Dasumpsha in Taurus. Okay, so this is really how you want to be looking at transits to Vargas. You're not just taking the moon and saying, oh look, the moon happens to be in Gemini, therefore the moon will be impacting this person's Drekana in Gemini, it will be impacting this person's Navamsha in Gemini, it will be impacting this person's Dasumpsha in Gemini. I mean, it just so happens that based on their natal chart, the moon does show up in Gemini. But you'll see that in order to see how the Vargas are really being impacted by transit, what you have to do is figure out what are the Vargas doing right now real time. And so if I want to explore this a little bit more and project out through, well, what I'll do is I will take my transit chart, my separate transit chart that I've pulled up here, and I'll pull up the change birth time. Excuse me. I'll pull up the change birth time option. And then maybe what I'll do is I will pull up the Shadasa Vargas. So now this is going to tell me all the Vargas. And if you watch, if I click one day, well, the Vargas are going to start changing. You'll see the planets moving. And that makes sense because as the time changes, well, the Vargas change. So that's an obvious statement. But now if I want to know, all right, well, when is this person going to have a Saturn return energy in their Navamsha? So here's the birth chart, right? Here's the current transits of the Navamsha, like what's actually going on in the Navamsha in the sky, the Navamshas of the signs, the divisions of the sign. We see that right now, Saturn is in Leo Navamsha, right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to change the birth time until eventually I'm going to see Saturn show up here in Sagittarius, which is where this person's Saturn is in their Navamsha. So let's see how long that takes. Might take a while because Saturn moves slow. Okay, so we just had a change of sign. So now this person is having a transit of Saturn on their ascendant in the Navamsha, because Saturn right now in the sky is in Virgo, according to this, again, theoretical approach. So let's just take it a little further. Let's go weeks. So even weeks, that Saturn's going to stay in the ascendant of this person's Navamsha for a while. Finally changes to Libra. And eventually, we get a couple months out, and we see that based on this date that we're using for an example, now we have Saturn in the exact same sign, Sagittarius, in the Navamsha, in the sky, as it is in this person's birth chart. So now I'm going to speak to a type of Saturn return energy, in a sense, for this individual based on what the Navamsha represents. And you can do this for any Varga. So the point I'm trying to get at here is that the transits of Vargas, basically you need to actually see real time how are the planets functioning in the Vargas real time, as though each Varga chart by itself is a transit chart for that particular Varga. So if I want to know the transits to this Navamsha, well, I'm going to create a chart for right now and see how does this Navamsha for right now overlap onto the natal Navamsha. And you would do that for any of the Vargas. So you need to consider this, explore this, and I think you're going to find some really wonderful insights that come to mind, especially if you know how to do transits well, and you can make these kinds of comparisons. but it's not necessarily that easy, but it is a lot of fun. You will start seeing things that will not be obvious, right? Things that you would miss if all you were doing was looking at transits from the Rashi chart, just through the basic 30 degrees of a sign. Now we're looking at the minute details of the sign, which is what the Vargas are. All right, so enjoy, experiment, explore. Let me know what you discover.